Hello, welcome back to the Rhetoric Review podcast. Today is episode 8, and we're going to be discussing a very important question. Should politicians be punished for lying? So, this really is an age-old question, right? Because politicians have this nasty, nasty attitude, or at least reputation, of being liars, deceitful, corrupt, power hungry, and, in a lot of cases, that is definitely true. But we also need to more seriously think about what should be the punishment for lying, because it's clear that, even though if we oust someone who's done something for lying, another person might replace them, and there are serious consequences, as we'll get into, of there being political miscommunication, both at the top level and from the bottom to the top. So at the end of this video, we're going to be discussing a possible solution that I think would be right, after examining some of the more deep moral questions that are involved with how Americans, at least, should approach politicians lying. So, what is lying? I think there's a clear differentiation and distinctness between fraud and lying. So, fraud would be if you're embezzling money. That's right. That's if you're taking government funds or taxpayer funds and spending them where you shouldn't be when they've been budgeted somewhere else. For example, if you try to force yourself to calculate an expensive dinner as a part of a political expense, right? That wouldn't be right, and it wouldn't be right to either your campaign donators or the taxpayers who fund your political activity. So that would be fraud. And there's other kinds of fraud, of course, and this includes insider trading, and this should be more discussed. But most people already agree that punishment for this should be the same as any normal civilian. Lying would be more of purposefully deceitful information disseminated to the public, either out of malice or out of gaining political favor by misleading the public. So this would be, for example, if someone were to say something untrue about the political opposition, or something untrue about some world event that's very central to the issues at hand or the issue of the current election, and gaining advantage because of so. So lying is strictly, when you don't have serious damage, and when you don't have evidence for whatever you're saying. So something I want to mention real quick is that politicians, we always give them so much flack for having this terrible reputation, but politics is, as Einstein once said, harder than physics. Politicians have to undergo through many decades of training and experience and battles, really, to achieve where they are. And those who make it to the top are there for a reason, and it's not very easy to make it there, whether it's through good compromise or smart campaigning, and deliberately sabotaging your opponent in a totally legal ways. There's a lot of ways you can get to the top, and it takes a lot out of not only the politician but themselves, the people around them, their family especially, as you're thrust into the limelight. And and it's a difficult thing to ask many to do. The average person will not want to be in the public spotlight with where any mistake might cause your entire livelihood to be removed, your career smeared, your reputation just completely thrown out the window. So going into this, you shouldn't go out with the impression that politicians are uniquely evil, but in fact, you should respect people who, work at politics at every level, whether most especially local government. It's just grueling, hard work to win local elections, work for the local companies, because local neighborhoods, because that's what actually makes up most of politics. Local politics. That's what decides individual people's outcomes, despite what the national level might say. Like we focus a lot on what's happening nationally, what we're doing, how much foreign aid we're spending, but ultimately, politics, when it affects your life, comes down to the local level. Very few times does it actually come down to the federal level. So local could be town or borough, county, state, city, anything, and it's time that we focused on more on local politics. So that being said, let's get into why this matters. So politicians, as I said, hold a lot of stake for society. They control how we view things, where we spend our money, how much money we can spend, what matters are at the very top of the agenda, of national agenda. They control our very livelihoods to a certain degree, and have some sort of degree of control over how we go about daily life. So this can be either on a macro level with tax rates, or it could be the simple decision to send us into a war, or donate money or send out loans to foreign countries, all these different things. And therefore there's money to be gained or to be lost, and this can impact the livelihoods of many millions of people. And there's also the issues, of course, of, for example, civil rights or immigration reform, citizenry. That's a very popular issue right now, right? With Donald Trump and his views on citizenry and immigration. So all these things have direct impacts to your life. So therefore, the politicians' truthfulness, or at least their utility, should be examined and discussed. Discussed. So this boom mic. Wow. So people can be misled in elections, of course, but also misled in their public perception of the politician. Because what's the currency of politics? It's ultimately traction, it's views, it's engagement, and we see that more now today than ever. That one, something a lot of people say is that the 2024 election was decided on the media, who was out there on the ground, going to podcasts, speaking, going to more rallies, going to interviews, all of these things were being challenged by the media, and that was Donald Trump this year. And more, we're getting to see that the currency of politics is more and more transforming into clicks and views, because that's what it's turning more into a spectacle rather than actual engagement with politics, right? You have a lot of people who aren't actually into politics, but are into the flashiness of it, the showiness, what they're saying, these speeches, and that feeds into the ability to lie, because when you have fanatics believing on both sides, of course, believing anything you say and taking it for granted, or trying to really push one side's agenda on behalf of that candidate, you're gonna have issues in society because you have untrue things being spread around, and that is hurting the general political state of being. So for anyone who is this man? Many of you who don't know him, this man is Henry Kissinger. He was one of during Nixon's time in the 1960s, was the Secretary of State and more or less the national. Well, let's just go with Secretary of State. That's the easiest to deal with. And he dealt with foreign relations. So during this time, this was entering into the Vietnam, war era, and himself and Nixon and the general public were told that we were sending planes to aid our allies in Vietnam, I believe. And what was actually happening is that these people in these planes were discreetly bombing Cambodia. In what's now known as the carpet bombings, hundreds of thousands of Cambodians, or 150,000 to be exact, Cambodians were killed, with many more damaged, and the country itself lay in ruin. And today it still has not recovered fully, as Cambodia is one of the only backwaters in that region. So given this, shouldn't Kissinger and Nixon and the general public have known about this tragedy? No. What was actually happening is that without any financial benefit to themselves, the people involved with the military personnel involved with these bombings were purposely, they created fake performance reviews, they created fake data, all of this elaborate contraption to make this possible. And so how is this possible? How is this sort of lying to the public where we act like we're sending aid to Vietnam possible? It's possible because the government is large, and therefore a lot of things work internally. People aren't engaged at that level of government, nor are we inquisitive as to its affairs, or at least weren't at that time. So the danger this represents is that people can be misled both in terms of policy and elections. Of course, we mentioned this year a lot of controversy with at least Donald Trump and his rhetoric on immigration. The now infamous the dogs and the cats, right, with the Haitian migrants. So this leads into sort of a solution, but a framework how you can treat the issue of politicians lying, which is republicanism. So what is America? It's not a democracy. It's a constitutional republic. It's a republic based, for the people, by the people, on the document known as the Constitution, and it's based on the virtue of the people. So in the last video, which you can check out now, episode 7, or the most recent one, I guess, we discussed the essays of Sentinel, who during the federalism era back in the 1800s, below 1800s and late 1700s. They were a group fighting against the creation of the Constitution due to certain issues. And one of the big things that they advocated for, which they eventually got, was a Bill of Rights, which ensured that the virtues of the people continued to stay strong and the government would not overstep their boundaries and become an aristocracy, as many feared. So the Bill of Rights was the compromise that many looked for, and it's what we have. Now we have a Bill of Rights. And it's one of the greatest parts of our founding documents, because it does guarantee a certain level of, actually a very wide level of autonomy for each individual citizen. And part of this freedom is our voting system. While we have had a lot of improvements with it, like I believe the 17th Amendment, right, which is senators voting for senators, and obviously suffrage for women, blacks, Asians, Mexicans, all these minorities. Ultimately, we've always had the freedom to choose who leads, and this has been even more so recently, right? You don't really have people guarding poll booths, trying to keep out certain people of certain races. You do have a certain level of gerrymandering, but still, if you can win the popular vote generally, outside of a few exceptions, you're able to actually win the localities at the very least. Now, nationally, you've had cases where the popular president doesn't win the election, as per 2016 with Hillary Clinton versus Donald Trump, but locally, it's mostly majority wins. So you do have the freedom to choose who leads. That's the main point that's important. You also have the freedom to choose what you learn, what you take in, and you also have the freedom to inquire. And as we said earlier, republicanism is based on the virtue of the people. So the responsibility to manage a good government, the responsibility to manage a honest government, is on the people themselves. And this creates both a high trust system and a low trust system at the same time. Low trust because we're always inquiring about the authorities of higher power. That's something that this nation itself is founded on, right? We're founded on the rejection of the monarchy, which told us to do things we don't like, basically, and that led to the initial motivations for the American Revolution. The spirit of anti-authority is within us, to a certain degree. At the same time, it's a high trust system, because as of the last, I'll say 100 years or so, we've began to rely more and more on government to do things for us, and we've seen the exponential, really, the expansion of government power and government control and what government does for us. So more and more, we've begun to, as a society in America, to expect the government to do for us, to do more for us, and that also means that we're less active in what we advocate for. We're less active in what we can actually do to help the country, right? Despite, who was it? I forget who it was, but JFK, right? That's not what the country can do for you, but what you can do for the country. That's, I think, the last time I've really heard that notion that America truly is built from the ground up, and there should be a rejection of the big brother state, the one that's there to fix our problems. So something interesting I saw while researching for this video is from WMSC, which is like a collegiate institution. And in one of their lectures, I quote, "And that is the core expectation among voters, that we are being told the truth. We are awash with lies from people who lead us, and it has decayed respect for democratic institutions." Now that's absolutely true. They're making a valid point, which is that the voters currently, as is the status quo, have an expectation to be told the truth. But as we just explained in our section about republicanism, as we're still explaining, that's missing the point entirely. This reliance on that we expect the government to be virtuous and to be, everything that they give us to be correct is not. It's antithetical to what made our nation great to begin with. The government and elections is not a buffet where we just go out and pick who's the best option. It's where we study studiously. It's our duty as the people to look who's best, to delve into what they're saying. And then, so long as the levers of information, like the internet, has made it so much easier now to actually access information and properly find out who's correct, who's not, who's lying, and who's telling the truth. The responsibility is on the people to select good politicians. And to say that the government needs to be the one self-regulating is not only dangerous because it means that the government can work within itself, like the Kissinger issue I just talked about, to make its own decisions, is that a collective effort to deceive the public will go unnoticed. Because when you have a, I don't want to say the word deep state, but when you do have people invested interest in, for example, keeping, yeah, I have most politicians, except for very few, aren't publicly against actually doing anything about insider trading, which is when when you think you're gonna make a loss, so you trade a certain stock because you know it's gonna go up or down, right? If you want to short sell it. So based on this, maybe there's just too many interests in certain issues that trusting the government isn't right. So this quote is, of course, accurate when it tells of status quo today and how people treat the government and how what they expect from it. It's definitely not what the founders intended, and definitely not what's actually good for the country to develop in a meaningful way. That being said, the ultimate solution and what we should expect isn't to ban someone or to hunt them down or to cancel them or to fine them for telling lies. The lies themselves should be the stab in their own back. Should a politician choose to lie in such an egregious way that it offends the general public, the punishment for them should be losing their political credit and not being reelected. Where does the ethos of a politician come from? Their status as a politician. So by losing that, they're essentially losing what makes them powerful and what makes them important, and thus they have the incentive to tell the truth. Otherwise, the people would vote them out. But because the people don't have this drive to find the truth en masse, at least, and are more reliant on believing what the media says on each side against the other party and how they're lying and all of this, and there's very little individual agency. Politicians don't feel this extra need to tell the truth because otherwise they would be voted out. But in the status quo, this simply isn't the case. People are not as engaged as they should be. I'm sure I could have found a number for this, but if you look around yourself, it's common sense. It's true. The fact that people don't care as much about politics as they should. It's their duty to vote, but it's also their duty to vote responsibly. Right? It's all of these things combined into one that make you a responsible voter and a responsible citizen that ensures the upkeep of the American system. It's not the government's duty to tell the truth. It's your duty to create a system where truth is valuable. And right now it isn't, and that's the main problem. The best thing, the most genius thing about this government that the founders designed is that it's a self-regulating process. Democracy is self-regulating, of course, in nature by, the very fact that you have elections. But it's also self-regulating in that the people have enough freedom and power over information that they can consume, that they can actually make sure that the regulation and the new candidates or the new electees are actually of quality. So while of course it would be great if all these politicians just didn't lie and it was really like a buffet where we just picked and chose who we want, the fact is that you need a diligent populace who are committed to the truth, or at least the facts, right? Truth can differ, as we've discussed multiple times in the past, and look at my 5th episode. But ultimately, you do need a populace who are respecting the truth and have a commitment to it. So finally comes our solution part of the video, positive incentives. So what are incentives? Incentives are things that you want that encourage you to do things that are good. So rather than punishing bad operators, bad politicians in the system, we should focus on rewarding good behavior through political credit, right? And this wouldn't be through money or something, although some people have certainly expressed that, like Elon Musk. But we should create a system where bad people, terrible people, can still be pushed to do good things despite them being terrible people, and how good people are even, going to excel even more. So there's multiple ways you can design a system like this, and honestly, this is such a big issue that I struggle to even get one issue. But let's first discuss what I mentioned earlier, which is Elon Musk's example, which is that we should give politicians a bigger salary so they don't feel the need to do fraud. Of course, it's a different issue from lying, but if there's more to be gained by holding office, maybe there's more to be lost as well. And of course, you could still do fraud while earning a higher salary, but the idea is that the incentive would be less, but again, this would only really apply to like senators and congressmen. I'm not really sure, but that's one lane you can go down. Another lane you can go down is shortening terms. Of course, you do need a certain amount of term length to achieve anything really, because you want to actually pass legislation, make compromise. But on the local level, on the local level, or the bigger level, I guess like state level, or even county level, or even House of Representatives level, it's certainly an option to make term limits shorter. Impeachment, and especially getting expelled from office, is a lengthy procedure. There's a reason it's never been done before, and the only person who even came close, Nixon, stepped down before he can actually be expelled from office. I can't really think of the word right now, but I feel like it starts with an E. Expelled. Evicted? Huh. Well, that's besides the point. So what's the main way people get ousted from office in America? Not revolution, not impeachment. It's elections. E for elections, right? That's the main way that's how you get rid of bad people. Elections, new elections. So if you discover something bad's happening with someone, it's not egregious, but you've discovered a trend of lying, maybe halving the term limit could possibly create the incentive to actually use those two terms for good, and then to continue to prolong those two terms with your good behavior. Otherwise, you'd obviously be ousted due to your inability to either govern, or your simply bad demeanor, or your lots of lying. And that would create an incentive to tell the truth, because otherwise you would lose your political credit very quickly. And already it is sort of like this. 2 years, it's a cycle of 6 years, every 2 years, but the same people still stay in power for 6 years, at least for the House of Representatives, right? So it's like a third of the House gets elected, then the next third, and the next third in 2 year intervals. But the same person is never reelected for more than 6 years. So scrutiny from the people is what it comes down to ultimately. The ultimate lesson from this video is that politicians shouldn't be punished for lying, because bad politicians are a punishment on the people. It's self-inflicted punishment, right? We're doing this to ourselves if we elect bad people and we continue to not do our homework and let bad people win primaries, get into power. Right? If you're so concerned about this, you really should be either voting for independence, or not voting at all, if you think everyone's rotten in the system, but really no one is, right? So given this, the takeaway from this video is that instead of relying on, or bemoaning that the government isn't telling the truth sometimes, and that it's not politicians aren't perfect and that they lie, you should be able to have diligence as a populist to actually encourage politicians to not lie. Because when you're diligent, and politicians know this, they know that the people are going to do their research and look at things and go beyond what the media tells them about the politicians, or just listening to the politicians themselves, then you know that you need to tell the truth, or else you're going to risk your political credit, your political ethos being removed. Because when you lose your political status, you lose everything, and that's the punishment we must have for these politicians. Right now, we are being punished for having lying politicians who are unable to actually feel the need to tell the truth 100% of the time. But by actually abiding by what the designers of the Constitution envisioned, and actually living out the freedom we have to access, think about how amazing it is that we get to actually access political information and research. This is a right, but also a privilege not afforded to other societies. We need to actually go in and research and find out what's right about each candidate. Look at what's good, look at what's bad, look at what lies they're telling, and that's our punishment. So once we get rid of, in the next election cycle, these rotten apples, so to speak, then we can start rebuilding with a new standard for politicians that hasn't existed before. And with so much internet access now, and so many programs which are admittedly not working very well, depending on who you ask, but existing programs on providing internet for everybody, there shouldn't be any reason why anyone should have sloth in approaching this issue. So when politicians lie and you cry about it, it's your own fault for not trying hard enough. And that is the ultimate lesson. So if you have any thoughts, comments, concerns, questions, critiques, or comments, please feel to leave them down in the comment section below. I love to respond to all these comments. We've had great conversations in the past, and it would mean the world to me if you also liked and subscribed to the channel. So that being said, it's been the Rhetoric Reviewed. Out.